Hi, good evening, and welcome back to today's daily newspaper analysis, which is brought to you by Roznama by Clat Possible. So let's make a start with the Indian Express today. Of course, the biggest piece of news which has grabbed the headlines in the country relates to the latest Constitution Amendment Bill. This tries to make changes to the system of women's reservation that was put in place by the 106th Amendment. Okay, so let's do a brief lowdown. In fact, the vote on these particular bills, which the government is trying to pass, is scheduled to take place at 7 p.m. today and will likely go on into tomorrow as well. Okay, so let's see the details. Now, as you all know, in 2023, the Constitution 106th Amendment Act was passed. Okay, this is popularly called the Nari Shakti Vandan Adhiniyam. And what does it provide for? It provides for 1/3 reservation of seats in Lok Sabha and all the Vidhan Sabhas for women. Now, in 2023, when the 106th Amendment Act was passed, there were two conditions which were imposed on it. And these conditions were that there needs to be a census after this act in 2023. And after the census, there needs to be a delimitation process. So two conditions were imposed on the implementation of the women's reservation under the 106th Amendment. Okay. What were the two conditions? Census and then delimitation. Of course, this would push women's reservation into the 2030s. So right now, the government has introduced a set of bills in order to bring forward the date of implementation of women's reservation. Okay, so there are certain controversies on this. As you can see from the title here, Lok Sabha debates the bills on women quota, delimitation, and House strength increase. Okay, so there are a set of bills that have been introduced in Parliament. The most important of the bills is currently known as the Constitution 131st Amendment Bill. Now remember, if it gets passed, it will get renamed as the Constitution 107th Amendment Act. Okay? All right. Now, what does this bill do? This bill proposes to do two things. Number one, increase the number of seats in the Lok Sabha. Okay. So, as you know, right now, the maximum number of seats possible in the Lok Sabha are 550. What the 131st Amendment Bill proposes to do is to increase the maximum number of seats in the Lok Sabha to 850. 850. All right. 815 of these for the states and 35 of these for the union territories. Okay. So that is the first thing that the 131st Amendment Bill proposes, to increase the number of maximum seats in the Lok Sabha to the number of 850, 850. Second, what it proposes to do is to change the conditions. As I said, the 106th Amendment, or the Nari Shakti Vandan Adhiniyam, had linked women's reservation to the next census and after that, the next delimitation. This is proposed to be changed. Now, alongside, there is a bill introduced called the Delimitation Bill 2026. What this proposes is to immediately set up a Delimitation Commission of India to conduct a delimitation based on the data of the 2011 census. Okay. Now, why is there a huge controversy? The massive controversy is because the government orally states that the delimitation will not change the proportion of seats that each state has in the Lok Sabha when compared to each other. Okay. Rather, it says each state's current number of seats will simply be multiplied by 1.5. Okay. And that is how the total number of seats will increase. That will also ensure that the ratio of seats held by each state in Lok Sabha will remain the same, right? The number of seats by each state will increase by 50%, right? But the ratio of the seats will remain the same. Now, this is something that the government is saying orally. However, this is not mentioned either in the delimitation bill or in the 131st amendment to the Constitution. Okay, so that is the entire controversy. As you all know, passing an amendment to the Constitution requires a very high threshold, right? It needs not less than two-thirds majority of those who are present and voting. But alongside that, it also requires a simple majority of total membership. Now, a lot of the opposition parties, especially the India bloc led by the Congress, says that we support the women's reservation, but we do not support this idea of an immediate delimitation. Okay. In fact, there are also concerns that in delimitation, there may be a chance of gerrymandering. So, gerrymandering is spelled Gerrymandering, and it's a term which originates in the US. What does gerrymandering involve? Drawing the boundaries of constituencies in such a way so that they are favorable to any one political party. So these are the concerns. The debate on the bill, the debate on the 131st Amendment bill and the delimitation bill and the Union Territories Amendment bill has been going on since yesterday. Today there was scheduled to be a vote at 4 p.m., though that was pushed to 7 p.m. I'm unable to check the latest news right now during this session, but the session is also set to last into tomorrow. So we will see if these bills end up passing, because the government by itself may not have the required majority. As the newspaper states, NDA is short of numbers and the government is unsure what to do. Okay, the debate is going on, and we will, I'm sure, discuss when we do tomorrow's newspaper analysis what is the status of the same. Okay. Next, we see on the front pages, Trump has made statements saying Iran is agreeing not to have nukes. Of course, Iran disputes this from time to time. So let's see what happens. Additionally, you will note that there is a proposal and an agreement on a ceasefire between Lebanon and Israel that has been announced separately. Okay. You can see here mentioned in the byline, Israel and Lebanon agree to truce, according to Trump. Okay. Now, we'll see what happens, in practice. But we'll see the updates. We'll see in reality whether the truce holds, whether the ceasefire holds. Okay. As of now, we should not conclude that Iran has actually agreed till Iran itself also makes an official statement on any possible agreement with the United States. Okay. So I hope this is clear. The top news story of the day, of course, relates to the women's reservation. Okay. Now, moving forward, as you all know, while doing the newspapers, we can usually skip the city and state portions and move on directly to national news. Okay. In the newspaper, these days are also dedicated pages for the state elections. Once again, the state elections, other than who ultimately wins, are not relevant from the Clat perspective, right? What promises parties make, these things are usually not relevant. Okay. Moving forward, a dedicated page here, once again, about the women's quota bill or women's reservation, right? And the biggest concern, right? The government is trying to say this is about women's reservation. The opposition stance is that in the name of women's reservation, you are conducting or trying to conduct an immediate delimitation, which will cause problems for Indian federalism and democracy. Okay. Once again, the biggest flashpoint is that the government says southern states will not lose out, the proportion remains the same. However, the opposition states that this is not mentioned in any of the bills that are being proposed. Okay. Now, one additional point here, Mr. Harivansh has been re-elected today as the deputy chairman of the Rajya Sabha. As you all know, the vice president, C.P. Radhakrishnan, is the ex officio chairperson of the Rajya Sabha. The deputy chairman elected today, his name is Shri Harivansh. Okay. As I said, the opposition continuing to call it, especially the delimitation bill, a fundamental attack on the federal structure. Okay, that is the stance of the opposition, especially led by the DMK and the Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu, M.K. Stalin. As you all know, you should keep in mind that the academic K.C. Weir described India as a quasi-federal state and not a complete federal state, because many aspects of the Indian constitution seem to emphasize and prioritize the powers of the union over the powers of the states. Okay, all right. Moving forward, let's go to the next aspect. This delimitation bill is being called a black bill, especially by the Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu. Okay, so that's the important thing. There's also an indication, an announcement here about the visit of the South Korean president, Lee Jae-myung, from April 19th to 21st. Okay, moving forward, piece of news about UCC, or the Uniform Civil Code. There was a hearing in the Supreme Court, and in a different context, the court observed that the Uniform Civil Code is a constitutional ambition. Now, why can it be called a constitutional ambition? Because the Uniform Civil Code is a policy prescription found in Article 44 of the Constitution, which says that the state shall endeavor to secure for its citizens a uniform civil code throughout the territory of India. This is, of course, part of Part 4, which constitutes the directive principles of state policy, and which is why it is described as an ambition, because it is not directly enforceable. However, UCC is an important piece of news this year because Gujarat has become the latest state to pass a uniform civil code. It has been passed by the state legislature of Gujarat, though the parts relating to the governor and the president are still pending. Of course, once Gujarat passes it, 3 states in India can be said to have a uniform civil code. Gujarat since before independence, Uttarakhand the first after independence, and once Gujarat finalizes the same, it will be the second state after independence to have implemented a uniform civil code. Okay, so I hope that is clear. In today's newspaper, several items which are important both from the perspective of general knowledge and current affairs as well as legal knowledge. Okay, number 1, the women's reservation, and number 2, the Uniform Civil Code. Okay, all right. Moving forward, several interesting editorials today. You can see here an editorial by Saptarshi Basak, who says, "The tragedy of Lebanon, a theater of other people's wars." Okay, so he goes into the history of how the country of Lebanon, officially known as the Lebanese Republic, has kind of become a battleground for other people to fight their wars, right? So it becomes almost a proxy battleground, right? In conflicts between Israel and Palestine, in conflicts now between Israel, US, and the Islamic Republic of Iran. So an interesting article going into the history. Right now, of course, Israel has invaded and is currently occupying large parts of Lebanon, especially along the Litani River, south of the Litani River. As you know, Israel states that it is attacking and occupying Lebanon because of the presence of the Hezbollah, which is essentially a military proxy of the state of Iran. Okay. Moving forward, an important agree disagree sort of column where two different authors write about a for and against view on the women's reservation, right? Whereas Avni Bansal talks about the fact that the government is trying to do several different things together, right? Delimitation, women's reservation, increasing the seats in the Lok Sabha. And so Avni Bansal argues that we should not just frame it as a yes and no. There, one can disagree with parts of it and agree with parts of it. And on the other hand, Shazia Ilmi argues that this is reform done right. That is to say, that she agrees with the course of action being taken by the government in introducing the 131st Constitution Amendment Bill, the Delimitation Bill, and the Union Territories Amendment Bill. So, interesting articles by the two authors here. Avni Bansal, of course, is an advocate at the Supreme Court. She's from the Congress, whereas Shazia Ilmi represents the Bharatiya Janata Party. Okay. A lovely article today by George John called When Trump Borrows God. Now, this goes into the recent controversies of Trump depicting himself in the image of Jesus, him fighting with Pope Leo, and so on and so forth. Mostly, I wanted to flag this article, not for general knowledge, but for its literary quality. And if you want to practice sort of English questions on it today, you can log on to the Roznama on our website, clatpossible.com, and you'll be able to attempt questions on this particular topic. All right. Moving forward, an interesting piece of news. Sorry, an interesting piece of news. The state of Meghalaya has announced that Garo as well as Khasi are now official languages of the state of Meghalaya. Right? So please do keep that in mind. As you all know, language politics is ascendant in the country and has been for years and years. India, of course, has no national language. However, the official language of the union is Hindi in Devanagari script. India has 22 scheduled or official languages, which are found in the 8th schedule of the Constitution. Each state is, of course, free to pick its own official languages of the state. But the key point is that India as a whole does not have any national language. So here we see a piece of news of the adoption of Garo and Khasi as the official languages of the state of Meghalaya, along with the English language. Okay. All right. Language politics, as you know, has also come in the news recently. Why? Because of the implementation of the three language formula under the new education policy. All right. Okay. Moving forward, very interesting piece of news. The United States has announced that it is going to end the waiver which it had granted for Russian oil imports. This is going to be a huge flashpoint, and we'll have to see if India complies with this. Scott Bessent, of course, is the Secretary of the Treasury in the United States, and he has announced that the sanctions waiver given to countries, which would effectively allow countries to import Russian crude oil without US sanctions. This waiver will now end. And the newspaper reports that India's oil imports are set to come under pressure because of this policy of the United States. Okay. Moving forward, as I said, Trump has announced that Israel and Lebanon have agreed to a truce for 10 days. And this is something that happened at the Washington talks. All right. So this is important. There are also ongoing talks and negotiations between Iran and the United States as well. As you can see, negotiated between mediated by the Islamic Republic of Pakistan. Okay, all right. Moving forward, there are some concerning reports about Iran using Chinese spy satellites to target US bases, though China has denied these reports. All right. So, this is what is important in international news today. The biggest thing is the announcement of the agreement between Israel and Lebanon in the Washington talks for a 10-day ceasefire or truce. Okay. All right. So I hope that is absolutely clear. Let's now come to the explained section. This is usually lovely. It can be the source for critical reasoning or English articles. Usually they have legal explainers as well. Okay. For example, here you see how the proposed women's reservation bills could affect the delimitation process. So this is something you should absolutely go through because, first of all, it gives a detailed history of women's reservation in the country. This is going to be important from a GK and legal knowledge perspective. So you can see the background, the national perspective plan for women, then talks about how women's reservation in India was first introduced under the 73rd and 74th Amendment Acts, which in panchayats and municipalities. Then it says the first time a women's reservation bill was introduced was in 1996 during the government of Prime Minister H.D. Deve Gowda. And this was known as the 81st Constitution Amendment. Okay. Then they talk about the first time one of the houses passed a women's reservation bill was in 2010 when the 108th Amendment bill was passed by the Rajya Sabha. And finally, the 128th Amendment bill was passed in 2023 and became the 106th Amendment Act. Okay, so very important for the history of women's reservation in India. And this article is quite brilliant. It talks about the complete history of how delimitation was frozen. So, really, this central graphic is about the history of women's reservation, and the rest of the article really focuses on the history of delimitation in India and how, because of the differential success of family planning in North Indian and South Indian states, delimitation has been frozen for many years. In fact, different states have the number of seats that they have in Lok Sabha based on the population of 1971, when India had less than half of its current population. Okay, so this is one article I absolutely advise you to read today, how proposed women's reservation bills could affect the delimitation process. All right. I hope that is absolutely clear. Let's now move forward. An interesting piece of news relating to FIFA today. The president of FIFA, whose name is Gianni Infantino, has announced that Iran will play in the World Cup despite the continuation of the war. Now, the FIFA World Cup happens once in 4 years. And this year in 2026, it is being jointly hosted by Canada, the United States, as well as Mexico. All right. So this is going to be an important piece of current affairs in sports news this year, and the impact of the war on Iran's participation will also be important. I also wanted to flag for you the full form of WADA. WADA stands for the World Anti-Doping Agency, right, which tackles the problem of doping in sports. And it's been announced that India's CBI, or the Central Bureau of Investigation, will collaborate with WADA in Operation Upstream, right? And the purpose of Operation Upstream is, of course, to curb the menace of doping in sports. All right. So I hope this is perfectly clear. So that's it with the Indian Express. The Hindu largely covers the same news. As you can see here on the front page, the women's reservation bill, the 131st Amendment bill, along with the delimitation bill being considered. And here, of course, the Prime Minister and the Home Minister Amit Shah stating that the seats of the states will simply be increased by 1.5 times, and that the ratio will remain the same. Of course, as I said, this is not mentioned in any of the bills. And as you can see here, the CM of Tamil Nadu, M.K. Stalin, burning a copy of the delimitation bill. Again, as I said, in international news, the top story was the announcement of the Lebanon-Israel ceasefire by Donald J. Trump. Okay. This year, the census of 27 is absolutely going to be important. Now, I know it is contradictory, but let's say this simply follows the Clat year rule, right? The census of 27 has already begun on the 1st of April, 2026. All right. So I hope that is absolutely clear. Moving forward, let's go ahead directly to the editorial pages because the rest of the news we've already covered through the Indian Express. All right. Okay. Moving forward, an article written by Shashi Tharoor in today's The Hindu saying the institutional sluggishness of the legal system. Okay, so he's talking about, so first, what is the meaning of the word sluggish? It essentially translates to slow, right? It means slow, right? And here, the point Shashi Tharoor makes is that the legal system seems to be sluggish or slow by design, right? The whole idea of adjournments, the amount of time it takes for particular disputes to go through their full life cycle. And essentially, he makes a case for judicial reform, especially to ensure that the sluggishness or slowness of the Indian legal system is corrected to ensure that all Indians are able to access their right to justice. All right. Okay. Moving forward, here an interesting explainer and done through a question answer session about Mythos AI, okay, which is developed by, tell me, by the AI firm Anthropic, right? So the idea is this Mythos AI by Anthropic is able to detect problems with the system, which previous models of AI have not been able to detect. And this is the first AI model that has been kept away from the public domain on purpose by Anthropic or by any other company. Okay, I hope that is clear. Then in today's text and context by the Hindu, an explainer on the Sabrimala temple entry case. As you know, in 2018, the Supreme Court had decided that women should be allowed entry into the Sabrimala temple. However, there was a review petition, and now they had referred 7 questions of law to a larger bench. In accordance with that, a 9-judge bench is hearing the cases relating to important questions about how to balance the right of individuals to freedom of religion versus the right of religious denominations to manage their legal affairs. And, at its intersection lies the question, is the right of religious denominations to manage their affairs subject to the fundamental rights of individuals, not just to freedom of religion, but also the right to equality? Okay, so this particular case is not really going to give answers on particular religious disputes like entry of women into Parsi fire temples or mosques or into the Sabrimala temple or the practice of female genital mutilation among the Daudi Bohra community. It is simply going to answer the questions of law that have been referred to it. So it is going to answer them in abstract. You should absolutely go through this article. It's an exceptional explainer on what are the issues before the court in this particular case. All right. Okay. So that's all for today. We have taken a deep look at the Indian Express And then we've taken a look at the important editorials from the Hindu as well. All right. So that's all for today. It's been lovely to talk to you this evening. And I look forward to doing the same over the coming days. Good evening and good night.